Washington Square On Air is the audio town square for the Washington Square Review, Lansing Community College's literary journal. Writers, readers, scholars, publishing professionals, citizens of the world gather here and chat about all things writing. Hey there, this is Melissa Ford Lucken, editor for the Washington Square Review. I'm here today with Andy Brent, who has a poem that will be featured in our Summer 24 issue. Hey there, Andy.
Hi, Melissa. How are you?
Pretty good. Tell us about your poem. How did you come to write it?
Well, the poem is called The Heaviness, which is something that Rodney Dangerfield, a comedian, used to talk about. His experience as a depressed person was very heavy, and it's kind of ironic that his profession was,
Right.
I mean, though self-disparaging, it was meant to delight people. So the poem is really sort of an observation of apartness and of people's inability to live anything but their moment in time without considering the past or the future and their place in it that is shared as it's their place in the world right now. So the poem, which I'll read here briefly, moves through 4 stanzas, and we start with pretty much the most granular element I could think of, and we move through sort of the biggest elements, physical elements I could think of. And while we do that, we're taking into consideration the frustration of an individual locked only in individuality. Okay. If that makes sense. I'm attempting.
It's going to make sense as you read the poem.
Okay, well, here it is. The Heaviness. All is emptiness everywhere. A mirror upheld before faces by faces that stare into unknowing eyes set dry in faltering towers of sand which decay short of daring everywhere. A futureless further time filled with tawdry recompense awaits this dispassion, pronounced oblique by the doom enthralled who cannot weep but by their elations, and they are everywhere. By what law is this universe simultaneously infinite and expanding at its margins, yet where relativity is expected, absolute perversities mitigate into an amazed guffaw everywhere? You will not believe, nor can you understand how thieves with blinding hand distract slighted eyes with histrionic demands, removing self from time but for thin feeling everywhere.
Beautiful. Thank you for reading that.
Thank you for printing it out.
Tell us a little bit about what was going on in your life personally when you wrote the poem.
Well, when I wrote this poem, I think I wrote it last summer, started it, I was beginning to think about creative writing. And I started, I meant to, the first time I went to college, I meant to be an English major. And when I got there, I was also an athlete, and they told me that their English program was a year off, and I'd have to start off as a journalism major or a history major or something. And the college was Defiance College in Ohio. And they never did get their English program while I was there. So I became a history major, but whilst there, I did contribute to the literary journal and the newspaper. I did some feature kind of comic writing for the newspaper and ended up working for the Crescent News there also. But the experience of creative writing there was a little bit put on for me. Like, they would have these poetry readings and they would insist upon dressing as beatniks and snapping their fingers at me. And
didn't feel
authentic. Okay. And of course, there was some pomposity about me. I thought I was pretty good, based on absolutely no production at all. But, I was reading big books and difficult books and not necessarily comprehending them all, but very much liking the cadence of the language and the meter in my ears. And it was kind of, I don't want to call it paltry, but it felt paltry to me to go and read something that I'd really considered on more than one level, and people kind of rolling their eyes at it. And then the people who came with, I don't want to call it bad, certainly very good writing, but it was more individual and inward looking and more emotionally charged on its face, right? Mm-hmm. And that to me wasn't doing it. Okay. And I don't want to sound like an elitist, which is not my point. It's that there's a place for all sorts of kinds of literature, and one's emotional experience is going to have to be authentic for the writing to be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not a showy person in that way, you have to find another way to, be artistic. And I felt it was limited. And I sort of migrated more to journalism, technical writing, that kind of thing. Okay. And when I left Defiance, short of a degree, several credits short, but I did eventually get it at Olivet College. It was 2008, and there were not creative jobs, and there were not jobs in writing. And so, I was able to work for my father's business a little bit, but really it was freelancing and trying to find any kind of work near media that I could get in. And that sort of moved my orbit away from creativity for quite some time.
Okay.
So that's where I was when I started writing this. And, starting to think about the concept, I said it was granular. You imagine perhaps a sandcastle person with a holster for a mirror and placed in there. And what that is, we assume that there's some solidified nature to our culture, to our shared experience. But more and more with these devices and with these social media and all this kind of thing, what we are is a construction of individuals, a construction of people who imagine that they are placed amongst others, but who really are but looking out from their own entrapment.
Okay.
And that kind of situation, decays short of daring. You can't do anything from that. You can only exist as a grain of sand at your place with the other grains of sand until a wave or the tide or rain or wind come and takes the thing away, because it cannot move. It does not evolve. It is not. And the next stanza, we're talking about a futureless further time. So these grains of sand, these people, us, you and me and everyone, we have to find a way to live not only right now, but also 100 years into the future and 100 years into the past. I was studying once at Michigan State University and trying to be a teacher, another run at higher education. You've got my resume, so I'm explaining it.
Okay.
I was in a class for people who would be English teachers. And at this point, I was like 25. I was older than my peers. And I made, having studied history before, being pretty well versed in it, the subject in class discussion turned itself to a point in which I could explain some bit of the War of 1812. And I'm sure it was esoteric and possibly not necessary, but one of the people in the class turned to me and said, "No offense, man, but were we even a country at that point?" And he's going to be teaching people next year.
Okay.
So that's where the idea that we have to be considerate of the past as we look to the future.
Right.
And we can't say, oh, these things never happened and these things were not. Nor can we demonize people based on wild sets of historical instances. Because if we do so, we're righting a wrong with yet another wrong, which can only perpetuate wrong. And if we're doing it to satisfy hurt feelings that are not even our hurt feelings, right? We're creating emotional wrong along with the economic wrong that only perpetuate and does not heal, right? At least in my opinion. I'm not a sociologist, and we're about to get into astrophysics, and I'm certainly not a physicist. So, but moving out from that idea, right? And also the doom enthralled who cannot weep but by their relations. People who are only absolutely happy or absolutely offended, who don't live in nuance or context, and in fact despise these things because they are not purely felt, but must rather be thought. And this leaves us in the night right now, and only in the right now, and we can't expand that thinking further. And so expanding further out, we go into, but by what law is this universe? Newton thought gravity was constant everywhere, right? Hume in his philosophy comes and says, I don't think so. I don't think that could be possible because, the planets wouldn't work in the sky and whatnot. And this is what got Einstein thinking about relativity, right? And relativity is encompassing of time and space and matter and all of it existing relatively at once. Well, and that's a hackneyed explanation of it, and people will correct me. But anyway, the idea there is Newton might have thought himself absolutely correct, right? And Hume might have thought himself at the cutting edge of thought when he was thinking. And of course, Einstein is now still held up as the pinnacle.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder what we'll think was silly to believe is absolute in 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you look 100 years ago, we didn't have penicillin,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we're right about to go into a terrible depression, you know, not economic depression. And so these things move. They move over time. And then finally, I said that we'd get bigger than the universe, and I don't know if it is bigger than the universe. It's a choice to believe, not knowing, right? In a deity or God or energy or whatever. And I'm not here to lecture anyone on
Mm-hmm.
that. But you will not believe, nor can you understand how thieves with blinding hand distract slighted eyes with histrionic demands. There is a thing that is faith. And in dearth of it, the heart cries out for something else. And that can be filled by something completely sectarian or secular and not supernatural at all. That's fine, but it will be replaced by something. And people who have had this faithfulness stolen from them by the demands of bad actors, or it doesn't matter. And I'm not going to say even either side, because there are no sides. This is a global consideration. They're going to be distracted by someone. And when the histrionic demands are absolute this and absolute that, and bad, or good and good without context and without consideration, people will only be able to live right now, not before and not after. And, you know, I can't believe I'm going to quote this poet, but T.S. Eliot said in four quartets, that which is only living can only die. And so we have to reach for something a bit more, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to stop talking now.
So it sounds a lot like when you wrote the poem, you were considering, obviously like a lot of things, but it sounds like some of that stuff is life experience things that you use for yourself, that you use the poem to kind of mull through them.
Well, not just my own, but
Mm-hmm.
also the experiences I observe
Mm-hmm.
among others. You know, I've met a lot of people moving around, and I've seen some who become very successful and some who have not achieved the kind of success that they are certainly capable of or whatnot. And people who are happy not being successful in other fields and unhappy being very successful in these kind of things. But what it is for me and my personal experience is, you know, we were talking earlier about ready access to emotion, and that's not necessarily always been my experience, right? Being more apt to observe and make not judgments, but make determinations based on that which I see and that which I hear and that which I see people do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very much thinking about that, but not from, you know, the poem is rather critical of intensely individuated perspective that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't look out. And so I guess you could say I was somewhat frustrated. And, you know, being an anxious person, I look at the news and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's horrendous things that are occurring. And even then, but they were talked about in such absolutes without people speaking of solutions or what might be done,
Mm-hmm.
that, yeah, it contributed to the composition.
Interesting. Let's loop back to the title.
Mm-hmm.
You said that it came from Rodney Dangerfield.
That's right.
He was obviously a comedian.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does the title relate, the concept of the heaviness?
Well, if I go back to the construction of sand, right, which is not necessarily meant to be quite so defined, but it's good. The individuals there, because they can't see anything but themselves, they might be comparing their state as a granular being or granular thing by observing others, but considering themselves in relation to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they're not really taking in the other grains of sand for what they are or appreciating them with any kind of empathy or whatever, but rather just, why don't I have that? Or look, that grain of sand doesn't have anything for me. Now, that sort of encapsulated judgment, right, to me is a very depressed state. And when you can't live but by your relations, when you can't do anything but feel happy or feel sad, you're not inquisitive, you're not, these other things, I think you're by definition very depressed. And we see people, and they talk about it with young people a lot, but I think it's all of us, when we're looking at these screens and we're lost in these screens and we can do nothing but, what are you doing? You're looking back at a mirror. And it's not, I don't think it's conducive to joy. And so that would be the idea of the heaviness and the depressive element. It's not, I'm not what you would call happy-go-lucky, but it's not an expression of something necessarily intrinsic to me. But I don't think that we're very happy. And I think that we use a lot of terminology to try to convince us all, ourselves and others, that the heaviness ain't there, but it's there.
Pervasively.
Yes. Yes.
Do you see a solution?
I don't think I'm qualified to offer a solution. I think that in our country, in the United States, it's got a lot to do with education and expectation and allowing people to find their thing, right? And that's socially, that's interactively, let's call it athletically, let's call it, in terms of their employment and their vocation and that kind of thing. But, there has to be a pathway to move towards self-sufficiency and find, what did Robert Penmorn say? He said, let the pain of the past and its pastness be converted to the future tense of joy, or something like that. So that's what I'm going for. If we're going to find a solution to the, this passion, as it's called, we're going to have to replace it with passion, but real passion, not saying that, I'm passionate about NFL football or that this is not passion. This is barely a hobby. It's sitting and looking at a thing. But what is the thing to which you will put your hand and show others your heart, right? Because you've done this. I've done this thing and it's good. And what's your thing? And I'll talk about your thing and you talk about my thing. And now we're existing together rather than you showing me your work. And I go, oh, well, that word shall not be. This is not observed, right? That kind of thing. The assumption that people want to cause bad with the things that they show, trying to be included and create good. I'm not organizing the thought well, but that would be the solution.
Do you think when you talk about passions that in order for someone for it to be considered, I guess a passion is because you said put your hands to it. So it requires some kind of
action.
Yes, action, doing, right, more than just thinking. So how, if somebody is a big reader, what would you do with that? They said, my passion is reading.
You got to read. You got to read, but not only read, but then write and engage in criticism. And I don't necessarily mean at the academic level. The first time I was ever aware of literary criticism, I must have been 7 or 8, and we lived on Margaret Street over near the Meridian Township BL line, in this big 3-season patio, and we had a lightning storm. And my dad let me stay up to look at it. There's no threat of tornado, and it was just amazing. And out of nowhere, he started to explain to me the story of Poncho and Lefty, the Townes Van Zandt, Steve Earle, Willie Nelson song, Merle Haggard, but Townes Van Zandt wrote the lyrics. Anyway, he didn't tell me the lyrics. He extrapolated a whole story about Lefty from Ohio who goes down to Texas and hooks up with Poncho, and they're the last of the outlaws, and they fight Comanches. I think he'd read Blood Meridian. It wasn't quite that awful. I was a little child.
And you were a captive audience.
Oh, captive.
Yeah. Just
mouth open.
Yeah.
And later on, I thought about this, very formative. And what he was doing was he was taking what wasn't in the text and surmising it. And that's basically what criticism is. And if people want to be great readers, you don't just read and look, because you can read the first 100 pages and the last 10 and figure out the story. But if you pick up, Moby Dick, right, you force yourself to read about the migration of the whale because Melville is saying something there, and you'll be bored. Sure you will, but the book's existed for 200 years and more. You can put it down and come back to it. It's free online, Right. And if you don't like it, you can put it down. But think about why you don't like it. Don't not like it because, whoever, The Rock doesn't like it. And don't like it because, another celebrity says, yeah, pick this up. Like it because you like it. And then write about it. And maybe you'll be moved to write a poem or a book or a story or something, and maybe it'll get good to you and you'll feel like you want to submit it. And that's doing something. Maybe you'll tear it up and never look at it again. But eventually you'll talk to somebody about it. And now it's a participatory culture and not an accusatory culture. And that's what I'd like to get to when we're talking about how to fix it, how to alleviate the heaviness. Let people shine a bit without judgment. Now, obviously, if it's a professional situation, we're going to
context matters
and we'll punctuate it correctly. And we're certainly we're not going to try to, people who engage in this honestly are not going to try to offend people just to shock them or anything. It's got to be honest and it's got to be well thought out. And you're not going for a reaction. You're trying to present something that can be understood on its own terms. Right.
Sincere, that comes from your own thinking.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your other writing.
Okay.
You actually work here at LCC in public relations.
I do. And a big part of that is I write advertorials for the college and articles. I help people write their own stuff. I've done work for our foundation and for our marketing department. I started in the marketing department, and there's been some good ad copy and article copy that's come out of that. We have a series in 517 magazine right now that speaks about attributes of the college that the community can partake in, and so expand our footprint just from academic things into more community-based things. And we recently have done a few articles for academic publications speaking about things our academic professionals have incepted here at LCC, and I've done that, largely with the help of the provost. It's actually been her project, but that's the kind of thing that I do.
Any of those come to mind, specific?
Oh, specifically, there's a good article that has appeared on our LinkedIn and from 517 magazine about Tyler N. This was last year. He was an LCC student and Lansing native who came up very quickly from a history of not having a lot of academic success to eventually earning a scholarship to the University of Michigan based on the work that he did at LCC. And he was a foundation student employee too. And that was a good article because it showed how anybody, through their own initiative and understanding the resources and help that's available to them, and also not feeling defeated by what they don't know, just understanding that human beings can learn things and move forward. Tyler went from a situation where he wasn't unhoused, but his housing situation was not necessarily safe, on a different side of town there. And now he's going to the University of Michigan on a scholarship. And he faced employment. He had to work to afford. And, the programs, he was too young for Reconnect, and it was only starting at the time. And so there were a lot of hurdles for him to get past. But that's what our college does. And we were founded in 1957 to address the needs of local manufacturing. And a couple years later, nursing was added to that. And since that time, LCC has expanded its programming to serve first our community and then to educate those who want to transfer out. And that model is why the college has been so successful.
A lot of what you were saying earlier fits in with our mission.
Absolutely.
And the idea of serving the community, all different branches of the community,
And that's why I'm proud and privileged to work here, because of the good work that we do.
For sure. I can relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
I teach writing. So
yeah. You read just before me at the women's literature read-in.
Oh,
it was
okay.
very interesting.
Yes. Yeah, that's always a really great event.
Yeah, I love it. It gives me a chance. My Aunt Barbara was a poet and pretty, she was published quite a few times and won some awards. And it's always quite, I enjoy reading there to honor her because, even though she got to experience the accolades of her work and everything in her lifetime, very few people are reading it now,
Mm-hmm.
because who goes out and buys a poetry anthology unless they're really into it or published in it. And so it's good, somewhere, speaking again about choosing to believe in the unknown, not knowing, somewhere I think that she's happy it lives on.
For sure.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about reading anyone else's writing is you bring yourself to it. So you get a piece of their meaning, but you also bring your own meaning to it. So the two kind of merge on the page.
Absolutely.
And that's really fascinating because with poems, but with also something like Moby Dick, a big novel, different people read it and they get slightly different things out of it. And that's, like you said, when you start to talk about criticism, you can explore your own, experience of the reading, but also what you brought to it and what you took from it.
Oh, and speaking of criticism, and also not a literature PhD, but I'm still going to talk about it anyway. You can read it from an experience that is not your own.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, develop empathy and consideration for other people because you're forced to consider a work from what must be their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoy that too because your thoughts about things can change once you get into that kind of deep consideration of others.
Yep. Talk a little bit about your writing in work. How does your creativity show up in your...
Oh, in the writing for the college. We want to be as Lucian Freud as possible and, make the second paragraph the first paragraph.
Okay.
But, things like 517, it's a little bit more lyrical. And so I'll tend to frame the beginning of articles from either an empathetic or a historical perspective, the purpose of a community college, things, I don't want to say ills, but disparate things in society that community colleges can help alleviate, support, that kind of thing. Anything that will make the reader think, oh, either that could happen to me, I would need help with that, or this is something I really want to help with, or I'm really interested in. And hopefully through this sort of didactic give and take, if the person is a prospective student, they'll take that, a little bit creative introduction and carry it with them through the subsequent paragraphs and return to it. Go, oh, so that and this and this. And if a person is another kind of influencer, if they're thinking about their family or a person that they know in the context of, will they be a student? The same applies. And where are these things read? Well, the printed ones are read in waiting rooms.
Right.
And what kind of people might we find there? Well, one of them might have an inclination to donate, right? Or they might be interested in certain things and they might read the article and discover, oh, I could go to a play at Summer Stage, or I could support this scholarship, or I could do this. And in that way, we kind of broadcast our mission to several different sets of potential people who could benefit from and straight up benefit our community.
Right. That makes me think about how the college benefits the community, not necessarily through coursework, but also things like this podcast.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. And also the Women's Literature Read-In, which is an annual event. And the things that go on in DART, the summer series plays outside.
Sure.
So there are a lot of things for people to be involved with that don't necessarily require them to, buy a textbook and
that's right.
show up twice a week.
And go all the way to the youth camps at East. That helps the community in terms of, I have small kids. What are we going to do with these people over the summer?
Right. Right.
And those kind of things. So it's, and as you say, the podcast, because this is pretty far reaching, and the community just listening to LCC Connect and Washington Square Review in particular, they're going to know things that they wouldn't otherwise have discovered.
Right. And it gives us an opportunity to invite different people into our community from all around the world.
Yeah.
Which is pretty awesome, because you just never know where that is going to lead.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thanks a lot for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope I didn't prattle on too much.
No, it was great.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Yep. Thanks for stopping by the audio town square of the Washington Square Review. Until next time, this has been the Washington Square On Air from Lansing Community College. To find out more about our writers community and literary journal, visit lcc.edu/WSR. Writing is messy, but do it anyway.